Hi, my name's Ben, and if you couldn't tell by all the pots and pans behind me, on top of the very conveniently placed meat cleaver, I love to cook. And I've cooked all sorts of cuisines over my time, but there's one cuisine that stands out to me as one I love, but I've never tried to make before. We're making authentic Southern barbecue. Let's hit it. All right, so step one, before we trim the brisket for the first time ever, I just want to point out, I'm wearing a bunch of clothing right now that I don't care about, and I'm gonna put an apron on top of this. I'm currently wearing a hoodie that is absolutely destroyed. I have sweatpants on, and I have a really dirty pair of shoes on. I'm doing this just because we are working with this absolutely gorgeous brisket here, but it has a lot of raw meat drippings on it. It's dirty, it's gross, and we really don't want to be messing up any of our good clothing. So just make sure you're wearing stuff you don't care about, or if you are wearing stuff you care about, just be really careful. But I would recommend wearing something you don't care about. So now with the apron on, we're gonna trim a brisket for the first time, and we're gonna see how this goes. This is a first time for me, but I just kind of want to walk you through what's gonna happen here. We have a big, gorgeous 16-pound brisket here. We're gonna try and get about 1/4 inch of fat distributed across this entire thing, starting with the flat, working our way up to the more fatty pieces. And then on top of that, there is this big vein of inedible fat right here that we have to trim off, as well as a bunch of silver skin and sinew all along here. That all has to go because that doesn't cook well, it's gross, it's nasty. This is gonna take a while. I've seen a lot of professionals do it. They do it real fast. I have a hard time believing I'm gonna be able to do it that fast. So, I'm gonna go wash my hands and then we're gonna get into this. Wash your hands, you're working with raw meat. Remember that. But anyways, I'm gonna start working on this part right here because I know there's a lot of fat here. And I'm gonna turn the brisket this way and I'm gonna start working down on this part, just trying to remove some fat until we work about 1/4 inch off. I'm checking it every once in a while because I've never done this before. I want to make sure I'm actually getting no more than 1/4 inch off. But this is why we have the garbage bin right below us here, because this just goes straight in the garbage bin and we don't have to worry about it anymore. Let's keep going. Okay, well you can see right here, we all make mistakes. You can see here I was trying to leave 1/4 inch. I went too deep. There's nothing you can really do about that, but that's just something you gotta keep in mind when trimming a brisket. You can make mistakes, it is something you're slow cooking, but try to avoid doing that because you really wanna make sure that fat's still on there. We're gonna pretend I did not do that. Also, the other thing I wanna point out, a bit late, but I right now am using one hand to handle the meat and one hand for the knife. I'm doing this just for sanitary purposes. Make sure that if you're handling raw meat, you're either washing your hands or you have designated hands for this because raw meat is gross. Don't get your stuff dirty. Don't be touching other things. Wash your hands. So I cut the video here because I want to show you possibly the most annoying part of this from what I've seen. And that is this big old vein of fat right here, because this is rock solid, inedible, and we have to get rid of all of it. And on top of that, we have another one right about here. So this is where it starts to get very annoying. What we're gonna do is we're gonna flip this over because I've basically trimmed most of the top fat here. And what we're going for with the top fat is kind of by feel. I wanna make sure I can feel the meat through the fat. And if you can't, you probably wanna trim a little more. And roughly that's about 1/4 inch throughout. But then we get to this point right here where that vein is, and that's where it gets a little dicey. So after I wash my hands, we're gonna start working on that. Starting on this vein, we're gonna start trimming. And you can feel it, especially when you're cutting this. It kind of pushes back against the knife. If you have a sharp knife, it shouldn't matter too much, but you're getting a lot of resistance here, and you can see this is hard fat. I can pick it up, it doesn't wiggle, it doesn't move. This is solid. You don't want this in your meat. Make sure you get rid of it. Throw it in your garbage bin. All right, progress here. I can actually feel the meat through the fat right now. That's huge. We're making progress. And all along here, the reason I'm not trimming out this bit right here, even though it's kind of created like a nice crevice, I can feel the meat through this. This is no more than a 1/4 inch except for about here. So I'll trim that a little bit. But what I really like is that this area right here, I can finally feel the meat through the fat, and it's not just rock hard, unrenderable fat. So that's progress. I like that. As you can see here, we've had to take out this entire vein of fat because all of that is hard and inedible. And on the top here, I'll flip it over for y'all. Gross. We've taken off all of this fat. You can see I missed a couple spots, went a little bit too deep, but we're generally looking for about 1/4 inch of fat across this. I might trim out this area just a little bit more, but outside of that, we're really looking for the ability to feel the meat through the fat. And outside of that, do what makes you happy. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna wash our hands, grab some plastic wrap, and just throw this in the fridge until tomorrow morning. We're gonna wake up at around 5:30-ish, maybe a little bit earlier. We're gonna prep our smoker, and I'm gonna show you how to do that as well. All right, so it is currently around 5:30 in the morning. I just woke up. I have the same clothes on as yesterday because I still have to make sure I'm wearing clothes that are beaters. And I just wanted to briefly talk to you about where you can get a brisket, sizing, and also seasoning. So right here, I have my beautiful 16-pound brisket. And I wanted to talk to you about where you can get your own brisket if you're gonna smoke as well, because there are a couple options, as well as sizing, because that's really important when you're smoking. So I got mine because I have a job at a restaurant. I was lucky enough to get mine through a restaurant supplier, but not many people have that opportunity. So I wanted to talk about kind of the two opportunities you have to get a brisket. You can get yours online. There's some great websites. Creekstone and Snake River Farms will sell you briskets, and they have sizing options, as well as if you go to your local butcher shop, they'll probably have a brisket for you and they might trim it for you. But if they don't, you can always place an order for a brisket, and they're super good about that. I have a 16-pound brisket here, and this is towards the larger end because briskets can range anywhere from about 10 to 20 pounds per se. And it's important, especially if you're home smoking, that you go for a more small brisket, especially because my smoker will not fit a 20-pound brisket, and you don't want to accidentally buy a 20-pound brisket and realize you can't actually cook it at its size. So aim towards the lower end. Usually 10 to 12-pound briskets are sold out, but you can go for 14 to 16 pound and always trim off a little extra. That's what I'm probably going to do. It's okay, it happens. Seasoning. See, what I have here is the Texas Classic salt and pepper. I see a lot of people on the internet use all sorts of complicated rubs. I will do that probably in the future, but as of right now, because this is my first full brisket, I really wanted to just stick with salt and pepper so I could taste the meat more. So we're gonna season up the brisket with just salt and pepper and go for just an even layer here on both sides. So I'm gonna start, I have about a 50-50 mix here. What I've done is I've taken the kosher salt and kind of a rough grind of pepper here that you can get either at your local spice store if you have that, or just grind it yourself at home. And we're gonna kind of just evenly distribute it across the entire part of the meat. Alright, so I wanted to go over my setup with the smoker for you guys real quick. So over here I have my smoker. This is the Big Green Egg. What we're gonna do is we're gonna end up putting all of our charcoal and our wood pieces in here. But before we do that, we're gonna start by putting some newspaper in our chimney starter right here and some lump charcoal, and we're gonna pre-ignite it. And after we get this up to a good temperature, we're gonna take our soaked wood and our wood chips, as well as the charcoal, and put it in there, and I'll show you guys that when that happens. All right, so we filled our chimney starter here up with lump charcoal, and make sure you're using lump charcoal, because if you don't use lump charcoal, you're gonna get that kind of artificial brick charcoal. It's not gonna taste as good, it's gonna burn worse, and it's going to make your meat taste weird. What I have here is some newspaper that I've soaked in olive oil, and we're gonna use that as kind of our starter for our chimney. And my box of matches here. Mine are long, they don't have to be. You can use normal matches if you want. I just had these lying around. We'll be right back when I light this up. Right, so we've taken our charcoal out of the starter and we've put it inside our Big Green Egg here. We have it sitting in there with some wood chunks and wood chips, which are gonna add the smoke flavor. And we're gonna close this with the vents open on top and on the bottom. And we're gonna let this smoke until we get it to around 225 to 215 internal. Then we're gonna drop our brisket in. On top of that, I have my heat shield and my grate here, as well as the vent for the top of the smoker. And on top of the heat shield, we're gonna put a water pan so it helps keep our brisket moist when it's cooking, because we don't want this to dry out. It's a big piece of meat and we really don't want to ruin it. So in the meantime, keep this closed, because if you're looking at it, it's not gonna heat up. And remember that when you're cooking the brisket, if you have to check the brisket multiple times, it's not going to cook and the temperature is going to drop and it's gonna take you longer. So make sure you're regulating your temperature at around 225, and don't look at your brisket while you're cooking it, because as the motto goes, if you're looking, you ain't cooking. So make sure you're keeping it around 225, 215. Check every 15 minutes or so, but don't look at the brisket, just look at your thermometer. So we got the fire up to around 250. We're gonna put our heat shield in along with our water pan, and then the grate on top, just right over here. Then we're gonna put the brisket. All right, so the smoker's sitting at around 250 right now, so we're gonna take our brisket right here. I had to cut a little bit off because it was too big to fit in the smoker. We're gonna throw it in here on top of the grate, and then we're just gonna let it be for a couple of hours and check it every 15 minutes or so to make sure the temperature's right. All right, so it's around 3:30 right now, and just about a couple of hours ago, we wrapped the brisket in some butcher paper, as you can see right here. And we did that, and we saw the brisket was around 170-ish internal. It's a little difficult because, you know, brisket is not one uniform shape. It's a little fattier on one end and a little smaller on the other. So you just kind of have to roughly estimate at around 170. And now we're keeping it in here at around 215 again, until we feel the brisket kind of loosen up a little bit, and then we're gonna take it out, we're gonna eat it. That's probably gonna take another couple of hours. We'll check in with you then, but until then, I just wanted to show you the butcher paper and what we do. Why we do that is we help steam the meat without getting any more smoky flavors, so it's not too intense. But I wanted to show that step to you because it's super important. And if you don't have butcher paper per se, you can always wrap in tin foil, or you can even finish it in the oven if you're feeling saucy. I don't really want to finish it in the oven because that feels inauthentic to me, and I had butcher paper available. But if you have the resource to use the oven, go ahead and do it. It's fine. But here we go. We're gonna let this brisket finish, and we'll show you the final products when we're ready. It's been about 12 hours in total. We've had the brisket wrapped for quite some time now, and after temp checking the brisket here, we have a kind of uniform temperature of around 200 and 205, and when it gets to that temperature, that's when you want to pull it. So we're gonna pull the brisket. It's wrapped in butcher paper. I'm gonna put it on my sheet tray right there. I'm gonna bring it inside. Right, so video over, but unrelated. Look what this did to my shoe. That is grease from the brisket. I transferred it about, I want to say, a total of 2 feet here, and look at all that grease. That's amazing. It's good brisket. Remember that. So now that we've pulled the brisket, we're gonna let this rest for about an hour. And then after that, we're gonna cut into it and show you the results. So until then, just be patient, wait, and make sure you don't cut into this too early. Moment of truth here. We brought the brisket in. We've had it resting for about an hour. We got it up to around 200 before pulling it from the smoker. We let it get down to around 190 or so. And now we're gonna unwrap it. We're gonna show you the results. I'm super excited, if you couldn't tell. This has been a long time in the making, all 13 hours or whatever. So I really hope we did this right. Look at that. It's kind of hard to get it out of the paper, but as you can see, that is exactly what we're looking for. We got this beautiful bark all along here. We got some nice give on the meat. It's very jiggly. It moves a lot when you touch it, but it's still staying intact. I'm gonna cut a piece off of this and show you what it's like in just a moment. First, I'm gonna wash my hands because they're now covered in brisket grease. I'll be right back. We have the brisket depapered. Look at it right there. It's an absolute beaut. You can see it wobbles a little bit when I move the tray. That's what we want. Now we're gonna cut the brisket. Now this is where it gets a little complicated because we have the lean side and the fatty side of the meat. And they have different grains because they are different parts of the meat. You can see kind of right in here, the separation. We gotta make sure we're cutting against the grain because we don't want our brisket to come out tough or stringy. So hopefully I get this right. Wouldn't put it past me to get it wrong, but first piece, we're gonna give this a taste test. Cheers. So that's exactly what we're looking for. Sorry, I'm really excited. So what we got here, you can see inside. I'm gonna bring the camera out of the tripod. You can see it right there. And we got a beautiful smoke ring along even just the flat part of the meat. It's super juicy. The bark is super tacky. It's super kind of dry, but not too dry. The inside is super moist. There's a nice juxtaposition of flavors. We get a nice kind of sweet aromatic flavor, kind of like coffee. We didn't put any coffee on this brisket. This is only salt and pepper. Yet we get a deep kind of coffee-like flavor. It's super rich. It's super filling. As you can see also though, it shrunk a ton. This used to take up an entire sheet pan, and we got it down to maybe half of it. So that's just a reminder there that when you smoke meat and you slow cook things like that, they're gonna shrink. So just remember that. Remember that when you're buying your pieces of meat. And you know, if this is any indication, maybe this isn't as hard as you think it is. But you know, it's a labor of love. Keep working at it, be patient, make sure you're checking your meat. You'll get good results like that. All right, so what we've done here is I've separated the fatty and lean parts of the meat, and that just makes it easier to cut because they do have different grains. So that's gonna make it easier for us to cut and serve this meat to all of the homies, all of our family, and everything like that. All right, y'all, so I just wanted to show off the smoke ring a little bit more. You see that nice red line all along here? That's what we're looking for. On top of that, you can see this is still super moist. And when I pick it up, it doesn't fall off because it's still kind of intact. But if I was to pull on this, it will come apart. That's what we call the pull test, and that's super important. Make sure your meat passes the pull test. So, cheers. All right, so it's 4:30 in the morning. I've been up for about 30 minutes now, and we're about to trim and then cook our second brisket. So, a couple things I want to point out because it is a very similar brisket to last time. This is a solid 14-pound brisket. We're gonna take it out and we're gonna trim it. But I want to point out one key difference, and that is, look at that marbling. You can see it a little bit on both sides, and on this side you can't see anything because it's just fat. But we got a higher quality brisket this time, and that's because I feel a lot more confident in my ability to smoke this time. We're trying out a new rub, we're gonna trim it, and then we're gonna smoke it and see how it goes. So stay tuned, and let's get to trimming. We finished trimming up our brisket, and now we're gonna get to seasoning. This here is the rub tub, and in the rub tub, I have a brown sugar coffee rub. Now, one really important thing I want to point out when you're using a different rub outside of the salt and pepper as before is this rub has sugar in it, and sugar will burn if you do not watch the temperature of your smoker. So, what you want to make sure you're doing is regulating your temperature really well in your smoker, and if this forms a bark on your brisket after about 4 hours or so, it's absolutely okay to wrap it early and let it sit wrapped up until it gets about to 205 or so in the smoker. It's no big deal. You're just waiting for that bark, and the sugar will bark up nice, but you have to make sure that you're not burning it. Otherwise, we're gonna do an even coating on this on the meat, and then we're gonna throw it in the smoker, and we'll show you that. For this brown sugar coffee rub, you can pause the video right here to get the recipe for this, but we're just gonna do a nice, really even coating on top of the brisket, and then we'll get to smoking. All right, so as you saw before, now that we're done with the rub, since I've been dipping my hand in here and putting it on the raw meat, you really don't want to be using this for anything else other than meat. If you're going to use it on something else, making sure you're cooking it out so it's not going to get contaminated. But I really wouldn't put this on anything else because I think it would taste absolutely rancid if it wasn't slow smoked on a piece of meat. So really don't put this on anything else. But if you're going to, and you did this like me where you're kind of double dipping, make sure that you're sterilizing this, make sure you're cooking it all the way through because you don't want to get raw meat on anything else and get your family food poisoning. We got the smoker going, we chimney started our coals, we dumped them in there. It's running at about 600, 700 degrees right now, but we're gonna close up the gauge on top and the bottom right there. And then we're gonna drop in our wood chunks, put the heat shield on, get our water pan ready, as you can see right there. And when it gets to around 205, 215, we're gonna drop the brisket in and it's gonna be cooking time. So we'll keep you updated after that, but after this is the part where you wait for a really long time until your brisket's ready. We'll give you updates periodically, but until then, stay tuned. Gloves. see, I got a layer around here, and I'm gonna wrap it around one more time just to hold in all that moisture. The smoker's running super hot right now, so we don't have to worry about losing too much internal temp, but give me one sec. Y'all remember last time I did this, I dripped grease all over my shoes, so we're gonna try very hard not to do that this time. All right, so with that, smoker's temp is down around 150-ish. We're gonna get it up to around 215 again. And we're about at the stall rate right now, so it's gonna take a little bit longer for the brisket to register above 175, 180-ish. Once it hits around 205, we're gonna pull this. We're gonna keep it wrapped. We're gonna let it rest. Either if you got a cooler, you can put it in there. I'm just gonna leave it on my countertop. And when we hit around 150-ish internal, we're gonna kind of take a check on it because the muscles should have relaxed, the protein should have released into the meat, and it should be super tender. So see y'all then. All right, so it's been a grand total of, I want to say, 13-ish hours, and the brisket just registered at around 205 internal, so we're gonna pull it, we're gonna let it rest for about an hour to let the proteins relax, and then we're gonna dig in. So I'm gonna grab the brisket and bring it inside. All right, so we're about 15 minutes out from dinner, but I wanted to show, look at the amount of fat that's rendered out of this brisket just on the butcher paper alone. That's how you know we've done good. I wanted to point that out just before we unwrapped it because that's absolutely amazing. I'm really excited for this. All right, I just want y'all to see there, we got such a beautiful smoke ring just along this meat there. And also look at that bark, it's super tacky. It holds its shape really well, but we also got a nice little jiggle on that meat. That's exactly what we wanted. This tastes absolutely amazing. I did originally mean to add a tasting section to this part of the video, but I did this brisket for a dinner party, and when I went to go taste it after the dinner party, all of the brisket was gone. So obviously it was pretty good, but no tasting section. It did taste great though. So it's about 7:30-ish in the morning, and you may be asking yourself, Ben, if we're cooking a brisket that takes 13, 14 hours, why are we waking up at 7:30 to do it? And that's because we're not cooking a brisket today. We're doing a pork shoulder. And so I seasoned this the day before. We're gonna throw it in the smoker for 6 to 8 hours because pork shoulder doesn't take as long, and we're just gonna let it ride. But yeah, I've seasoned this the day before, which is super important for pork shoulder because you wanna draw a lot of that moisture out before you smoke it. We're gonna pull it and we're gonna have it for dinner. So we're gonna show you the results for that. Stay tuned. Right, if you couldn't tell by the flames coming out of the chimney starter, it's ready, so. That right there is the fun part. We're gonna regulate temperature for a while since we want this to be at around 250 to the 215 mark. We're just gonna keep that gauge kind of open and closing it, trying to restrict the airflow a little bit. And once we kind of reach a sweet spot where the fire is kind of consistently at like one temperature, it's a lot easier. But for the first couple hours, you're gonna be monitoring this. After that, go take a nap, go back to bed. But in the meantime, just let it ride out. You can see all that smoke covering out. That's all good. And we will see you in 6 to 8 hours. All right, so a status update. It's been 3-ish hours, and just proof that nobody's perfect. If you look right there, chimney starter's going again. The fire may or may not have gone out. You're supposed to soak the wood chunks before you put them in the smoker. I did, but they were a little bit too wet, so the fire after a while kind of got dampened. It happens, it's okay. Our pork here is looking really good so far. We're gonna keep it going. But in the meantime, we're just gonna have to restart the fire. I have new wood chunks in there as well that have been soaking. And if this happens to you, no big deal. It's a little bit of a setback. With brisket, it's a little bit more of a big deal because brisket's no longer cook time. With something like pulled pork, I have nowhere to be. It's a weekend. So we're just gonna take our time with it. We're gonna let it get super buttery and nice. And we'll see you then. But I wanted to show you that, we can make mistakes. That's allowed. It's a process. Just remember that these things take time, and there's usually a solution to problems like this. All right, so we're about 4 hours into the cook here, and in my hand I have some apple cider vinegar in a spray bottle. Now what we're gonna do is, since we've hit the 4-hour mark, every hour or so, every 30 minutes, 45 minutes, we're gonna come in and we're gonna spray down the pork to keep it moist on the outside. You can do this with a mop, you can do this with a spray bottle, but what we wanna do is add an extra depth of flavor with the apple cider vinegar on top of keeping the meat moist and not letting it dry out inside the smoker. You can also do this with beer or pickle juice. I just happen to have apple cider vinegar. But remember to do that so you don't let your meat dry out. We've hit the 8-hour mark cooking time-wise. Pork shoulder is registered at around 200 degrees internally. So what we're gonna do now is, because we're still an hour and a half out from dinner, is I'm gonna take my aluminum sheet tray here. We're gonna put some beer inside of it. We're gonna put the pork inside there, and we're gonna stick it in my oven at around 250 degrees just to keep the pork moist and hold it at temp for another hour and a half before we have dinner. This can work for up to 5 hours if you really want it to. If you have a warming drawer, if you have a cooler, you can put it in there with some hot towels. It's really just to hold the meat. It won't get dry, it won't overcook. Just kind of keep it at temp. And this works really well, say if you're taking it to a cookout or anywhere else. So just remember that for in the future. But in the meantime, we're gonna take the pork out of the smoker and throw it in my oven, and we'll see you guys afterwards. Just want to point out, so I can show you guys this, it's jiggly, it's got a wonderful bark on it, and it's dripping. That's exactly what we want. See y'all inside. All right, so we got the pork shoulder inside. You can see it right there. We got some Coors Light, because that was just what was in my fridge, inside the bottom of this pan to keep it moist and add some flavor. I'm gonna take this aluminum top right here. We're gonna throw it in my oven. We're gonna wait. Cheers. All right, so the pork's at a solid 201 internal, so we're gonna remove the bone. We're gonna take it and put it on the cutting board over there, but first we're gonna pull out the bone here, so. Yep. Ta-da. Look at that. All right, so we got the pork on the cutting board here, and what I really wanna showcase is just how loose that is, how all the muscle has relaxed, and also the bark on that. Look at how tacky that is. Look at how there's no rub coming off. That is absolutely fantastic. That is what we're looking for. I can't wait to eat this. All right, so for the moment of truth here, got me some nice bark, got me some nice pulled pork here. I'm gonna show it to the screen. Cheers. It's ridiculous. So what I love about this rub, and we put it on the brisket too, I think it really shines in the pork because we have a nice sugar and espresso blend in here. And it adds a depth of flavor, not only sweetness, but a little bit of bitterness to counteract it. And on top of that, the meat is just so tender. That is, it does not get better than that. And if it wasn't so hot, I'd show you this. I can tear it apart with my hands. It is as loose as possible. It's luscious, it's fatty. It is absolutely fantastic. You'll love this. So it's currently about 5 in the morning. And it's a special 5 in the morning today because we are doing our final brisket cook of the video. We have right there a Wagyu golden brisket right there, and we're gonna do a simple salt and pepper rub for this. Gonna make sure all the flavor of the actual meat shines through on this. We're gonna throw it in the smoker for about 14 hours or so, wrap it after 8, and we're gonna show you the results. I'm super excited for this. This one's gonna taste absolutely amazing. Can't wait to see what we do. I want to take this as a brief moment to talk about seasoning our briskets, because I just seasoned our brisket here with just salt and pepper, and you notice I've gone a little heavier than the last time I just did a salt and pepper brisket. That's because last time I under-seasoned it. You can go pretty hard on salt and pepper. This is a very large piece of meat that we're trying to penetrate flavor into, even if it's just the flavor of salt and pepper. So you can put a pretty good layer of this stuff on there. When I did the coffee rub, I added more both for the pork shoulder and for this brisket, and so I kind of regretted not adding a more salt and pepper base rub onto my original brisket. For this one, we're adding a little bit more, even if we're just trying to let the Wagyu flavor shine through. It's really important that we get a good layer of salt and pepper on there on both sides. Get the sides as well, that's really important too. Every single part of the meat needs to be seasoned because we want that flavor. So just remember, always, always, always over-season this a little bit more than you need to. And if the white people tell you it's not good, it's because they're white. And you know, whatever. You want to make sure your meat tastes good, and you want to make sure that it doesn't need salt. This is the time to do it. Don't fix it later, do it now. The smoker is running at about 550 right now. I know you can't see it, but it's going right now. So we're gonna grab the brisket from inside. We're gonna throw it in there. We're gonna stifle it. We're gonna let that baby go for 14 hours. We'll show you the results. So I'm off to school, but I just wanted to show you real quick. We've had this going for about 3 hours now. We're keeping it around 205, 215-ish. I'm just gonna let that keep going. When I get back from school, it'll probably be wrapped, and we'll see it then. All right, so it's been almost perfectly 12 hours now. I think it's about 12 hours and 2 minutes. We wrapped the brisket at around 6 hours. It barked up real fast, even with just the salt and pepper rub. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna grab our gloves, we're gonna bring it inside. It's registered at about 205 internal on the inside after the wrap, and we're gonna just sit it inside. I'm gonna put it in a really low heated oven for a while because it's not dinner time yet. We're gonna let it be, and when dinner time rolls around, we're gonna cut it, and you're gonna see what it looks like. All right, always remember, wear your gloves and don't spill beef tallow on your shoes. I've made both of those mistakes, and neither of them end well. So, gloves, and hold your brisket, you know, away from your body. So usually at this point in the video, I'd be taking the brisket out of the smoker, we'd be carving it up, and I'd be showing you, you know, the pull apart and how it tastes and the beautiful smoke ring. But if you haven't noticed, we're not in my kitchen, we're in my room, and that's because this brisket didn't really work out the way I wanted to, but instead of being upset about it, I wanted to talk about failure and how we deal with failure, what we can draw from the positive aspects of this brisket, but also address what went wrong, because it's important to not only see what you did right, but see what you did wrong in a process. So the main thing, and the first thing I want to talk about, is that was the largest brisket I've ever done. And though that's not inherently a problem within itself, it was too big for my smoker, which is a direct heat smoker. And when you use a direct heat smoker, and you have a heat shield that you have to place over the fire so the meat doesn't singe, you have to make sure that the meat actually fits over the heat shield, and in this scenario, the brisket didn't. And a lot of the flat or the non-fatty part of the brisket ended up not over the heat shield on direct heat, and it dried out. It got gross, and that hurt because I had to cut off about half the flat when I originally took it out of the smoker because it was hard as a rock, it was dry, and it was inedible. And that's really tough, especially when you put 14 hours into it. And on top of that, after the wrap, we didn't realize it as well, and so the part of the meat that was over direct heat after we wrapped it in butcher paper, it singed onto the meat. And so when we peeled off that butcher paper, the bark came along with it. And those are two very big problems, especially because the bark is such an important aspect of the brisket. And on top of that, I've been really evaluating myself based off how the flat of the brisket looks more than the fatty part, because the flat is much harder to maintain in terms of its fat content and also how it tastes. And so having to throw away about half of the flat like that really sucks, frankly. And it's hard to watch, but I also want to focus on some of the positives we got out of that, and the main one being my seasoning ratio, which has been kind of off since I started doing this brisket challenge, and it only has really been good for the one pulled pork I did. So I got the seasoning ratio a lot better. I was afraid to put too much seasoning on the meat earlier because I do have a history of over seasoning things when I cook, and I've kind of had to learn, especially when you slow cook something, that sometimes you got to go a little bit harder on the seasoning, even if it is just salt and pepper, than you would usually do for, say, a burger or something else. And the seasoning ratio was a whole lot better, and also the fatty part of the brisket still turned out absolutely amazing. There's some wonderful photos I want to show you of the sandwich I made, along with the spicy slaw and pimento cheese I put on it. And that's where I want to talk about drawing the positives, because there were some aspects of this that did turn out okay. And those are the ones that you have to kind of take in stride, while also monitoring the fact that you have stuff to work on next time. So I will be doing another brisket cook, hopefully, and I'm sure I'll be filming it because I don't want to end on that. I want to end on a positive note, and I want to show you guys that it is possible to, you know, learn from your mistakes and do better. I said I wasn't happy with our last brisket, so we're doing another one. It's 7 a.m. right now. We got our fire going. We got our wood chunks soaking down below. You know the drill at this point. What I want to talk about is the differences of what we're doing with the brisket since our quote-unquote failure, if you feel me. So if you've noticed on the trim here, I've cut off a lot of the lean section to try and make the entire brisket more uniform in shape. This is really important because it's going to help us kind of even out the cook and not have any really dry bits that are going to kind of ruin our brisket flavor and texture. And on top of that, I got a new rub as well. This is the coffee rub from before. I'm going to flash the recipe up here real quick again. I added a little bit more cayenne than I did last time and a little bit more coffee grounds just to kind of even out the flavor. But I wanted to add an extra depth of flavor to the brisket. We're going to over season it because it's really hard to over season brisket. And then we're gonna drop our fire in. We're gonna get it to 205 on the smoker. We're gonna drop our meat in and we'll see you then. So big difference here. You can see how much more rub is on the brisket. I can barely see the meat under there, and that's more what we're going for because I want the flavor to get penetrated deeply into into the meat. And on top of that, a lot of the other briskets we did were just frankly under seasoned. And so I don't want to make that mistake again. I want the flavor of the coffee and the brown sugar in this rub to really come through. And so we're adding a lot more rub. You can see it all over the tray. And hey, if we want to add more, we can, but I just want to get way more flavor out of this meat than I would any other. And you can see our fire's going pretty hot as well. We're about to dump the coals in and get this baby started. Just a quick reminder before I throw the brisket in, the smoker's running at about 400, so we're going to drop the brisket in and smother it. But I want to remind you that since we're using a sugar-based rub here, remember the brisket's going to bark up at a different time than it normally would. So just keep an eye out for it. You can wrap a little bit earlier, so it's not a big deal. I just wanted to remind you guys, sugar-based rub, it's going to bark up faster under heat, and you might have to wrap it a little earlier. It's going to taste the same. You're still going to get a lot of great flavor out of it. It's just a reminder. All right, so it's been about 3 hours or so, but we had to take the brisket out because the fire died down completely. It happens, no big deal. Just means you're gonna have to cook the brisket for a little longer to get it back up to temperature. We got our chimney restarted. I've put new wood in the smoker. We got our water pan and heat shield at the ready, and we're just gonna take it as we get it. So once this heats up again, right here, we're gonna throw the brisket back in and be on our way. It's been about 6 hours since we threw the brisket in. We're about to pull it, but we're not quite there. I want the bark to get a little more tacky and a little more charred. But what I want to show you guys is this right here. This is an aluminum sheet tray with tallow in it. And you may be asking, well, we haven't used aluminum before or foil or anything like that. Why are we using it now? And the simple answer is after the last brisket got pretty scorched in the smoker, I want to throw this brisket in the oven to keep it nice and moist. So what we're doing is we're going to take the brisket, put it in that tray after it gets nice and barked up. We're going to tent it with foil, and we're going to throw it in the oven at about 300 degrees for another 6 hours or so. This is going to keep the brisket super moist, and compared to last time, it's going to keep it more flavorful and fatty. And since last time it got a little bit scorched and dry, I'm trying to avoid that, trying to keep it moist, and I'm serving this to my family tonight, so I want it to be super good for them. So that's what we're doing. As you can see, got some beautiful bark right there. I'm gonna pull the brisket, show you that. We're gonna bring it, put it in the oven. God bless, we'll see you inside. Update, brisket's in the oven now. Gonna leave it there for about 6 hours or so. We'll give you an update after that. All right, so as always, we got the brisket up to 205, so we're letting it rest now outside of the oven until it gets to around 150 internal. And we're gonna slice it up, we're gonna eat it, and you get to see our reaction. All right, so I'm gonna bring the brisket over to the cutting board because it's at 150 internal. I'm gonna show you the bark, we're gonna cut it open, and we're gonna try it. See that? That's how your meat's supposed to wiggle when you're done with it. Look at this bark. Look at everything about this. This is by far the best thing. Look at how loose this is. This wiggles like a pork belly. It's got such a beautiful smoke ring on it. The bark is fantastic. I get almost no rub on my hands when I tap that. This just looks amazing. I'm gonna grab a knife, we're gonna cut into this and give you my thoughts. I can guarantee you already this is gonna be really good. I have to kick this one out because she keeps on licking the beef fat off the floor. All right, anyways, without further ado, let's try some meat. We're gonna grab ourselves a piece of the lean side here. So what you see here is, look at how beautiful that is. And this is not dry, this is good meat. It pulls apart just beautifully. There's a little bit of resistance, but it doesn't fall apart in my hands. And that taste. I could eat that for days. I mean days, homeboy. We're gonna take the camera out of the tripod real quick. Look at that smoke ring. Look at the way it wiggles. That's mint. That's exactly what we want. That's how you want your brisket to look. Fire. So I'm taking a moment out by the smoker, and I want to talk to you guys at the end of the video about what we've learned and what we've taken away from barbecue. And I think the first thing is that it's a labor of love and it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, but those end results are absolutely worth it. You know me, I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning to get these cooks done, and in the moment, it really doesn't seem like it's worth it, but I'll tell you, the taste of that barbecue and also the reactions that you get from your family and friends will absolutely make it worth it for everybody involved. On top of that, I want to touch on how personalized barbecue can be for a lot of people. I went into this video with completely different expectations of what I was going to achieve by the end of it. I wanted to make sauces, I wanted to do more recipes, but at the end of the day, I ended up just cooking more briskets and really trying to perfect the craft for myself. And that meant only doing one rub because I really liked it and wanted to make it better. And that meant trimming my brisket differently or getting higher quality meat. And that's a little bit of a different direction than I intended, but the results were just as great. And that's what cooking is about. It's personal to you, and it should be. And I think that's really important. So just to end this video, I want to say I really hope you guys learned something. I know I had a great time filming this, and happy barbecuing.